Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining me. This is Kathy, and I have a Halloween card to share with you today using stamps from Purple Onion Designs, and later on down the road I bring in a stamp set from My Favorite Things as well. I started out by stamping the images onto a piece of Nina Solar White cardstock. I used My Favorite Things Extreme Black Hybrid ink. And then I just jump right in with the Copic Coloring. Both the cardstock and the ink are alcohol marker friendly. And for this little bunny, um, the coloring was really easy. These images are kind of small, so they didn't take too long to color in. For the bunny, I started out with E43 and just added shading around the sides of his face and around his little body there. And we've had a severe weather change here in Texas, so my allergies are crazy. So my voice is going to be going in and out a little bit. But on a good note, at least we're getting some fall weather here because up until last week we were up in the mid 90s and I am very ready for fall. Anyway, back to the coloring. After I was done with the E43 to add in the shadows, I came in with E42 and blended that out a little bit further. And then finally blended all of the colors together with E41. For his little belly, I wanted his belly to be a lot lighter, so I only used E41 on that part of the little guy there. For his mask and his cape, I used a couple of different V markers. V17 is the darkest color that I use. So I go in with a pretty light hand just to add in where it would be the darkest, like on the outer edges of his face. And then for the cape, the areas that were right under his chin and then towards the back of the cape as well. Next, I come in with V15, which is my midtone, and I just color in the rest of his mask with that and then add a little bit of the V15 to his cape. Finally, I come in with the V12 and finish coloring in his cape to get all of those colors to blend in nicely together. For the insides of his ears, I just literally did a line of R20 and then went over it with R00. For his candy bucket, I only used two colors, YR18 and YR07, keeping the shadows on the outer edges of that little candy bucket. Again, with these images being as small as they are, you don't have to do too much blending. Moving on to the little bat, I started with BV29 and added in where the shadows would be, like at the upper edge of his wings, and then the little, I don't know, what are they? They're veins or something down in his wings. I did add a tiny little bit of shading underneath the witch hat and on either side of his face. Then I came in with BV25, blended those out just a tiny little bit. Again, just a line of color. And then I filled in the rest with BV23. Now, this particular trio of colors, they blend really very well together. So when I do come in with the lightest, the BV23, I do go over all of the markers to make sure that they do blend nicely and I don't end up with like weird splotchiness. To color in his little hat, I started with YG17 and I did the tiniest of lines along the very bottom of the brim that flips up. I also did a tiny line behind the band and kind of a little bit on either side on the outer edges of the hat. Next, I came in with YG25 and extended the tiny little line on the brim that is flipped up and blended a little bit out up behind the brim. and then filled the rest of the hat in with YG03. And then I moved on to the band around the hat, and I used the same purples as I did for the cape on the bunny. I used three colors on the band. I don't know that that was really necessary. I probably could have just gotten away with two. Same thing for the candy bucket for the bat. I only used two colors, keeping the darker color on the outer edges as well as the interior of the bucket, so it looks like it's a little bit further back. I used a fine tip black pen just to dot his eyes, just to make them a little bit more noticeable. For the star on his hat, I used Y15, but I end up cutting that off later on, so it doesn't really matter. Next, I'm going to start working on my background. I took a piece of painter's tape and just did a rough tear down the center. I wanted to have like a rough, grassy, hilly, edgy thing. And then I had die cut a circle from masking paper. So I put that up in the top corner, and then I had to lower my grassy mask down below. I'll be doing ink blending with some Distress Oxide inks, and I started out with Forest Moss to do at the top of the grassy area because it would be further back, it would be a little bit darker. Then I come in with a tiny little bit of black soot just to get along the very top edge of the grassy area or the very bottom edge of my painter's tape, whichever way you want to look at it. Then I come back in with the forest moss and blend the black out a little bit. For the very bottom of that panel, I use peeled paint, and again, this is all Distress Oxide ink, and I'm using makeup brushes that I found on Amazon. And if I haven't said it already, everything that I use, all the supplies and everything will be listed in the description below. And the Copic markers I use will also be listed in the description below, as well as over on my blog. Once I was done blending the bottom part of that panel, I removed the painter's tape, and then I took the other half of the painter's tape and masked off that little hill that I had done. And then just to protect the very bottom, I just put another piece of painter's tape down there. For the sky, I started out with Stormy Sky Distress Oxide ink, and I had to hold my mask down a little bit because it was starting to peel up a bit. And I kept the stormy sky around the moon so it would have a nice glow. The second color that I came in with is Faded Jeans, and blended that out a little bit further. Next, I come in with the Chipped Sapphire, and I think it's at this point that I remember that I need to get it darker towards the bottom or the lower part of the sky, and I needed to lighten it up around the moon. So I came back in with the Stormy Sky and added that around the moon so I would have that glow. Come back in with the Faded Jeans and add a little bit more, making sure that I keep that glow for the moon. And I finish up with the Chipped Sapphire and keep that around the outer edges and then along the bottom edge by the mask where the grassy hill starts. After I was done with the Chipped Sapphire, I brought Stormy Sky in again just to lighten up that top corner. And then I come in again with the black soot just to add a little bit of darkness around the very outer edges. And this panel, by the way, was cut with a stitched rectangle die. I'm not sure what the measurement is, but I'll list that below as well. It was a stitched rectangle die set from My Favorite Things. And the cardstock that I did the ink blending on is Bristol Smooth cardstock. Next, I removed my masks and I cleaned up my desk, and I used the negative portion of the circle mask so I could mask off the sky while I inked up the moon. And to make sure that I protected my sky, I just used more painter's tape just to cover that area up. For the moon, I used Mustard Seed Distress Oxide ink and just did a quick layer of that and removed my masks again. And I decided that I needed to have some kind of tree line or something in the background. So this is where I brought in the stamps from My Favorite Things. This tree is from the Warm and Feathered Hugs stamp set. And to make sure that I got it lined up right where I wanted it to be, I pulled out my stamp platform and lined up the stamp where I wanted it to go. I inked it up with VersaFine Onyx Black ink because I wanted a nice deep black impression, and I find that using the VersaFine Onyx Black ink over Distress Oxide ink gives that really deep black impression. Next, I pulled out my Mr. Huey's white spray and just tapped it, although I wasn't getting very good taps. So I finally gave that up and just grabbed a white gel pen and added in a few of my own little stars. The Mr. Huey's spray mist has been discontinued, but there are a bunch out there that would work just as well. I did get a few little white spots on some of the trees, and I just used a black marker to go over that white spot so that I didn't have the stars on the trees. Next, I adhered the ink blended background onto a piece of gray cardstock, and then adhered the gray cardstock to the front of a top folding A2 size white note card. Off screen, I had fussy cut the images out and added some foam tape to the back of them. I kind of played around with the placement with the bunny, and then I put him in place, and I adhered the bat over the moon. Added a little bit of shading underneath the bunny so it didn't appear that he was just kind of floating in air. And that finishes up my card for today. Thank you so much for joining me. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you've not yet subscribed, I'd love it if you would. And don't forget to ring the bell so you're notified every time a new video is posted. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.